The wedding was beautiful. Expensive, elegant, the kind of event people would talk about for years. Crystal chandeliers, a string quartet, a guest list full of people pretending to like each other. My daughter, Sophie, was the centerpiece of it all, floating across the ballroom in a dress that cost more than my first car. She was happy. That's all I cared about. I had spent months preparing for this day, making sure everything was perfect. Lisa had been the one obsessing over the details. She always did love control, but I was the one making sure the bills got paid, the last-minute disasters were handled, that Sophie never had to see the stress behind the curtain. I had done my job. I had given my daughter the wedding she deserved. Then Lisa's mother had to ruin it. She caught me just as I was about to get another drink. I had made it a point to avoid her most of the night, knowing full well that a conversation with Eleanor was about as pleasant as a root canal. But she found me. Her manicured nails dug into my arm as she pulled me aside, her breath thick with champagne and something bitter, like she had been sitting on something nasty for a long time, waiting for the right moment to let it rot in the open. For 20 years, you've been raising another man's child. It was the kind of sentence that didn't land right away. My brain refused to process it, like a program crashing from bad input. And then, all at once, it hit. A pressure in my chest. A slow, creeping burn at the base of my skull. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses in the background turned into white noise. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw the satisfaction curling at the edges of her mouth. She had been holding onto this for a reason. She wanted to hurt me, but she had no idea what she had just done. I smiled. A slow, deliberate smile. You don't realize what you've just started. The color drained from her face. I stepped back, leaving her standing there, frozen. My body was moving before my mind caught up. I needed air. I needed a second to think, to process, but there was no time. My eyes swept across the room, locking onto Lisa. She was in the middle of a conversation, her hand on the arm of some old friend, laughing at something he said. She looked normal, like she hadn't just detonated our entire lives. I made a beeline for her, but before I could reach her, someone grabbed my shoulder. Hey man, you okay? You look like you just saw a ghost. It was my brother-in-law, Dan. Nice guy. Oblivious. I barely heard him. My pulse was in my ears, my jaw locked so tight it hurt. Not now, I said, brushing past him. Lisa turned just as I reached her, her smile still plastered on, her eyes scanning my face with mild curiosity. What's wrong? She asked, tilting her head. I almost laughed. What's wrong? I leaned in close enough that only she could hear. My voice was calm. Steady. Deadly. We need to talk. Now. She blinked. A half-second pause. Calculating. Then she nodded. All right. I led her through the crowd, out of the ballroom, down a hallway where no one could hear us. The second the door closed behind us, I turned. Is it true? I asked. No preamble, no build-up, just the question that would decide the rest of my life. Lisa's expression flickered, just for a second, and that was all I needed. That split second of hesitation. That was my answer. Lisa didn't answer right away. That was her first mistake. A smart person, an innocent person, would have been confused, would have asked, what are you talking about? Would have been offended, angry even. But Lisa just stood there, blinking, her lips parting slightly like she was running through different responses in her head, calculating which one would do the least damage. I felt something shift in my stomach, a slow, sinking feeling, like the floor was caving in beneath me. I don't know what you mean, she finally said, her voice carefully measured. I almost laughed. Don't do that, I said, stepping closer. Don't insult me. Just tell me the truth. Lisa's eyes darted to the door like she was checking to see if anyone could hear us. Or maybe looking for an escape. Where's this coming from? She asked, her tone shifting to something gentler, something rehearsed. What's wrong? You're acting. I cut her off. Your mother. She told me. She just walked up to me, completely unprovoked, and dropped it like a bomb. 20 years, Lisa. 20 years, and I had to find out from her. Lisa's face changed. It was fast, barely noticeable, but I caught it. A flicker of something. Not guilt. Not remorse. Annoyance. She sighed, crossing her arms. She had no right, she had no right? I repeated, my voice rising. That's what you're mad about? Not the fact that you lied to me for 20 years? Lisa's jaw tightened. She didn't look sorry. She didn't even look nervous. Just irritated. Like I was making a big deal out of nothing. You need to calm down, she said, and that was the moment I knew. I knew. Not just that she had lied. Not just that Sophie wasn't mine. I knew that Lisa had never planned to tell me. She had never intended for me to find out. She had gone to bed every night, looked me in the eye every morning, shared a life with me knowing, and she had never felt even an ounce of guilt strong enough to make her confess. My hands curled into fists. Who is he? I asked, my voice like ice. Lisa exhaled slowly through her nose, her posture shifting from defensive to something more controlled. You're making a scene, she said, her voice low. And this is not the time or place. I laughed. A sharp, humorless sound. You think I give a damn about the time or place? Lisa pressed her lips together, her eyes flicking to the door again. That's when I saw it. Not guilt. Not fear. Strategy. She was thinking, how do I get out of this? Not, how do I fix this? And I felt something inside me snap. You know what? I said, stepping back. You're right. This isn't the time or place. But we're going to talk about this, Lisa. And you are going to tell me everything. I didn't give her a chance to respond. I turned and walked out, back into the reception, back into the sea of people who had no idea that the foundation of my life had just been ripped out from under me. Lisa didn't follow. She didn't even try. And that told me everything I needed to know. I walked back into the reception like a ghost wearing my own skin. Everything around me, the music, the clinking glasses, the laughter, felt distant, hollow, like I was watching it all happen through a fogged-up window. People smiled at me, patted me on the back, completely unaware that my entire reality had just shattered into something unrecognizable. I spotted Eleanor still standing by the bar, swirling a glass of wine, pretending not to watch me. I changed direction and walked straight toward her. She saw me coming and stiffened, gripping her glass a little tighter. You wanted me to know, I said, keeping my voice low. So talk. Eleanor's lips pressed together in a thin line. Not here. Now. She hesitated, glanced around, then sighed. Fine. Outside. I followed her through the side exit, the air hitting me like a slap. The night was cold, the kind of crisp chill that burned your lungs if you breathed too deeply. The moment the door shut behind us, I turned to her. Who is he? I asked. Eleanor took a slow sip of her wine, like she wasn't about to detonate the last remaining pieces of my life. You don't need to know that, she said. Like hell I don't. She exhaled through her nose, looking almost amused. Why do you think I told you? She asked. The question caught me off guard. Because you're a miserable old woman who likes to stir the pot. I shot back. Eleanor chuckled. A dry, humorless sound. That's part of it. Then she took another sip of wine, staring off into the distance. But mostly? Because Lisa should have told you herself. A long time ago. The way she said it, the weight in her voice, sent a cold prickle down my spine. She wasn't just talking about the affair. How long? I asked. Eleanor met my eyes, and for the first time, I saw something there that almost looked like pity. Since the beginning, she said. I felt my stomach drop. Lisa's known this whole time? Eleanor nodded. And she knew you'd never leave. That's why she never told you. Something inside me twisted, sharp and brutal. You mean she counted on me loving Sophie too much to ever question it? Eleanor didn't answer. She didn't have to. I turned away, running a hand over my face. My skin felt too tight, my chest too small to contain the rage bubbling up inside me. I want the truth, I said. All of it. Eleanor hesitated. And then she told me. Every single thing. The man Lisa had been with. The years she had spent lying to my face. The way she had let me play the fool, let me raise a child that wasn't mine while she went on like nothing had ever happened. By the time Eleanor was finished, my hands were shaking. She must have seen something on my face because, for the first time that night, she actually looked nervous. What are you going to do? She asked. I took a breath. And I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. You'll see. Then I turned and walked back inside. Because if Lisa thought she could bury this and walk away clean, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. I walked back into that ballroom, the chandeliers glowing too bright, the music too loud, the voices of 100 people blurring into meaningless noise. But I wasn't hearing any of it. My thoughts were a wildfire, burning through every memory, every moment of my marriage, twisting and warping everything I thought was real. Lisa had lied to me for 20 years. Not just a mistake. Not a one-time thing. She had woken up every single morning, looked me in the eye, kissed me, shared a life with me, all while carrying a secret that made a joke out of everything we had. Out of me. And I had loved her. God help me, I had loved her. That love was turning to something else now. Something colder. I scanned the room, my eyes locking onto her in an instant. Lisa was standing near the head table, talking to a group of guests, her posture perfectly poised, her expression smooth. Controlled. Like she hadn't just been caught red-handed. Like she hadn't just stared me down in that hallway and chosen to lie again. It was almost impressive. She must have sensed me watching her because her head turned, her eyes meeting mine. She didn't look panicked. She didn't even look surprised. She just smiled. Like we were still playing house. Like I hadn't just learned that my wife was a liar and my daughter wasn't really mine. I felt something inside me settle. A decision solidifying, turning into steel. Fine. If she wanted to pretend, I could pretend too. For now. I walked toward her, my movements measured, controlled. She tilted her head slightly, amusement flickering in her gaze as I approached. Enjoying yourself? She asked, her voice smooth, effortless. If I hadn't just torn apart the last 20 years in my head, I might have thought she was genuinely happy. I almost wanted to applaud her. More than ever, I said, my tone just as easy, just as fake. Lisa smiled, reaching out to touch my arm like we were the perfect couple. Her fingers barely grazed my sleeve before I stepped back. Subtle. Almost unnoticeable. But her smile faltered for half a second. Good. She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, Sophie appeared at my side. Dad. She beamed, reaching for me, wrapping her arms around me in a quick, excited hug. This is perfect, just God, exactly how I dreamed. Thank you. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to smile as I hugged her back. Because no matter what Eleanor had said, Sophie was mine. Maybe not by blood. Maybe not in the way I had believed for 2 decades. But I had raised her. I had held her when she was scared, taught her to ride a bike, stayed up all night with her when she was sick. I had done the things that mattered. Lisa might have lied about the biology, but she couldn't rewrite the years. I'm proud of you, kid, I said, my voice rougher than I wanted it to be. Sophie pulled back, grinning. I'll see you in a bit, okay? I nodded, and she disappeared back into the crowd. Lisa was still watching me. So, she said, voice light, easy. Are we done with this little tantrum now? I turned my head slowly, locking eyes with her. She wasn't even sorry. I had been prepared for guilt, for excuses, maybe even for tears. But I hadn't been prepared for this. Lisa wasn't afraid. She wasn't regretful. She was bored. Like I was an inconvenience. Like I was ruining her night with my feelings. And that was the moment I realized just how far gone she really was. I smiled. And then, with a voice so calm it barely sounded like my own, I said, you have no idea what's coming, Lisa. Then I turned and walked away. Because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I didn't go far. Just enough to let the words sink into Lisa's skin like a slow, creeping poison. I wanted her to feel it. The shift in the air. The way the ground beneath her feet was starting to crack. She thought she had buried this secret so deep it would never see the light of day. She thought she had one. But now she knew. She hadn't. I could feel her eyes on my back as I made my way through the room, weaving between guests who had no idea that the man they were greeting with warm smiles and firm handshakes had just discovered his entire life was a lie. I found Dan, Lisa's brother, near the bar. He was drinking whiskey, talking to a couple of guys I vaguely recognized from past family gatherings. The moment he saw me, his expression shifted. He knew something was wrong. Dan had always been the only decent one in Lisa's family. He was younger than her by a few years, and unlike their mother, he didn't thrive on manipulation. He had a job in finance, a wife who actually seemed to like him, and kids he adored. He was normal. Boring even. But right now, I needed boring. I needed someone who would tell me the truth. Hey, I said, clapping him on the shoulder. Got a second? He studied me for a moment, then nodded. Yeah, of course. We stepped away from the bar, finding a quieter corner of the room. Dan glanced around, lowering his voice. You look like you're about to murder someone, he said. Half a joke, half not. I didn't smile. I just talked to your mother. Dan sighed, running a hand through his hair. Jesus. What did she say this time? I stared at him. And in that moment I saw it. The flicker of knowing in his expression. It was subtle, so damn subtle that if I hadn't just been shattered from the inside out, I might have missed it. But I didn't miss it. You knew, I said, my voice eerily calm. Dan froze. What? I took a step closer. You knew. He swallowed. Listen, how long? Dan exhaled slowly, rubbing his jaw. Complicated. Uncomplicated. He hesitated. Then finally he spoke. I found out a few years ago, he admitted, his voice quiet. Mom told me. The room around us seemed to tilt. And you didn't think I deserved to know? It wasn't my place, Dan said. Look, I didn't like it, okay? I told Lisa to tell you. I told her she was being selfish. He stopped himself, shaking his head, but she swore it didn't matter. She said you were Sophie's real dad in every way that counted. That telling you would just destroy everything for no reason. I laughed. A sharp, bitter sound. For no reason, I repeated. Dan exhaled. I'm sorry. I should have done more. I should have. Who is he? I asked. Dan hesitated. Don't lie to me, Dan. He sighed. Then, reluctantly, he said the name. And the ground finally, fully, collapsed beneath me. Because I knew that name. I knew him. I had been to his house. I had shaken his hand. And worst of all, I had called him a friend. That I stood there, staring at Dan. The name he'd just spoken repeating in my head like a death sentence. My jaw tightened, my fingers twitching at my sides as I tried to process. I had imagined the worst, but somehow this was worse than that. The man Lisa had slept with. The man who was Sophie's biological father. Tom, my friend. Or at least the man I had thought was my friend. I knew him, had known him for years. He had been in my house, had sat at my table, eating meals my wife had cooked while I played the role of the oblivious husband. I had confided in him, talked to him about my family, about Sophie, about the joys and struggles of being a father. And all this time he had known. I took a slow, measured breath. How long? Dan shifted uncomfortably. I don't. How long, Dan? My voice came out low, steady, but razor sharp. Dan exhaled. The affair? I don't know exactly. But Sophie. He hesitated. Since before she was born. The words landed like a punch. Since before she was born. So Lisa had known even then. She had found out she was pregnant and made a choice. She had looked at me, at Tom, at the situation, and chosen to let me believe the lie. To build a life on it. A muscle in my jaw twitched. Does he know? Dan hesitated. Yes. I closed my eyes for a second. Of course he did. Of course he did. Tom had known all this time, just like Lisa, just like Eleanor, just like Dan. Everyone had known but me. I let out a slow breath, pressing my tongue against the inside of my cheek to keep from exploding. Dan shifted on his feet, glancing around the room, then lowered his voice. Look, I get it, man. This is awful. But maybe. I opened my eyes and leveled him with a stare. Dan stopped mid-sentence. Maybe what? I asked. My voice was terrifyingly calm. Dan swallowed. I just mean. Maybe don't do anything rash. Not here. This is Sophie's night, man. That nearly made me laugh. Sophie's night. The daughter I had spent 20 years raising, not knowing she was another man's child. The daughter Lisa and Tom had let me raise while they kept their dirty little secret. Sophie's night. I almost pitted Dan for thinking that I was the problem here. I took a step back, inhaling deeply. Where's he? Dan paled. I don't know. I tilted my head slightly. Dan exhaled sharply. Fine. Last I saw, he was out on the balcony. I nodded. Good talk, Dan. Then I turned and walked away. Because if Tom was here, in this very building, then he had made the biggest mistake of his miserable life. I moved through the crowd like a man with a mission, my pulse thrumming with a steady, dangerous rhythm. The weight of the last 20 years sat on my chest, pressing down with every step. The betrayal, the lies, the sheer audacity of it all, of Lisa, of Eleanor, of Dan, of Tom. It was suffocating. And now I knew Tom was here. At my daughter's wedding. standing under the same roof as me, probably sipping a drink, laughing, shaking hands, completely unaware that the man he betrayed now knew the truth. The thought alone made my blood feel like molten steel. I reached the balcony doors and pushed through them, stepping into the crisp night air. The city stretched out below us, twinkling and oblivious. The noise of the reception was muffled behind me, leaving nothing but the quiet hum of distant traffic and the faint clinking of ice in a glass. And there he was. Tom stood near the railing, one hand resting casually in his pocket, the other swirling a drink. He looked the same as always, tall, broad-shouldered, his suit tailored perfectly to his frame. Silver threaded through his dark hair, laugh lines crinkling at the corners of his eyes. He had aged well, I'd give him that. And why wouldn't he? He had been living a lie and getting away with it. I took a slow, deliberate step forward. The sound of my shoes against the tile made him turn his head slightly. When he saw me, he smiled. "Hey man," he said, raising his glass slightly. "Some night." "Huh? Some night." That was what he had to say. I stared at him for a long moment, my hands curling into fists at my sides. I thought about every moment I had spent with this man. The times we had grabbed beers together. The times he had come over for barbecues, playing the friendly family friend role so perfectly. The times he had looked me in the eye while sitting at my table, while watching me raise his child, and never said a damn word. I took another step forward. "Yeah," I said, my voice eerily even. "Some night." Tom must have sensed something shift in my tone because his smile flickered, just slightly. "You all right?" he asked, tilting his head. I let the silence stretch, watching him. I wanted him to feel it. The way the air had changed. The way the ground beneath him was about to give out. "You know," I said, my voice calm, "it's funny. Weddings, they make you think. Make you reflect. You look at the people around you and wonder, who really belongs here? Who actually deserves to be celebrating?" Tom chuckled lightly, but there was an edge to it. "Deep thoughts, man. You sure you're not drinking whiskey?" I ignored that. "Like, for example," I tilted my head. "Should a man be celebrating at a wedding when he spent the last 20 years lying to the groom?" That did it. Tom's grip on his glass tightened. His jaw twitched. And for the first time, he knew. I knew. I watched the color drain from his face, the realization sinking in like a stone to the bottom of a lake. He swallowed, opening his mouth, but no words came out. I took another step closer. "How long were you going to keep it up, Tom?" I asked, my voice still dangerously smooth. "How long were you going to keep smiling at me, keep shaking my hand, keep looking me in the goddamn eyes, knowing that you were the real father of the daughter I raised?" Tom blinked. Just once. Then carefully, he placed his drink down on the ledge of the balcony. "Look," he said, his voice low, "I don't." That one word stopped him cold. He exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand down his face. "I never meant for it to happen like this." I laughed. A quiet, deadly sound. "Like this?" Tom shook his head. "You have to understand, do I?" I took another step, standing right in front of him now. "Do I have to understand, Tom? Do I have to understand how you screwed my wife and then let me take care of your kid? Do I have to understand how you looked at me all these years, knowing the truth, and decided to keep playing pretend?" Tom flinched, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. Then finally he looked away. Because there was nothing he could say. He had no excuse. No justification. Nothing. "You're a coward," I said, voice low. "You and Lisa. Both of you." Tom sighed, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "I know," he admitted. "I know, okay? And if you say you're sorry, I swear to God." He shut his mouth. I let the silence stretch. Then finally I spoke again. "You don't deserve to be here." Tom looked back at me, his brows pulling together. "What?" "You heard me," I said. "You don't belong here, Tom. This isn't your night. This isn't your family. You lost that right the second you let me believe your lie for 20 goddamn years." Tom exhaled, shaking his head. "It's not that simple." I smiled. A slow, cold smile. "It is," I said. "And you're leaving. Now." Tom hesitated, glancing toward the ballroom doors like he was considering whether or not to argue. But when he looked back at me, at the rage barely contained in my expression, he made the right choice. Without another word, he grabbed his drink, downed the rest of it in one go, then set the glass back down. And he left, just like that. But as I watched him go, something inside me twisted. Because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I watched Tom disappear through the doors, his shoulders tense, his movements clipped. He didn't look back. He didn't argue. He knew he had no ground to stand on. But the thing that got me? The thing that twisted inside me like a knife? He still walked away clean. He had just escaped 20 years of lying, of pretending, of sitting at my table, watching me raise his child, and he just walked away. Just like that. Like this was something he could just step out of, leave behind. Like a bad conversation he could shake off with another drink. But me? I was still standing here, holding the weight of it all. I took a slow breath, flexing my fingers at my sides, trying to get the tension out of them before I went back inside. I wasn't done here. Not even close. Because Tom wasn't the only person who had lied to me. Lisa was still inside. And it was time for her to face this. Publicly. I turned, pushing back through the balcony doors, the warmth and noise of the reception hitting me instantly. Laughter, clinking glasses, music, it was almost comical. My life was burning down and everyone else was still celebrating. I scanned the room and it didn't take long to find her. Lisa was still near the head table, chatting with a few guests, her expression smooth, effortless. Like nothing had happened. Like she wasn't standing in the middle of the wreckage she had caused. I made my way toward her, my steps slow, deliberate. Every inch of my body was thrumming with something electric, something alive, a rage, clarity, something in between. Lisa must have felt it because, as I got closer, her shoulders stiffened. Then, slowly, she turned to face me. "Hey," she said, a smile flickering across her lips. "Everything okay?" I let the silence stretch. Her expression barely faltered. Because Lisa, my wife, had spent 20 years perfecting the art of pretending. "You tell me," I said finally, my voice low. Lisa exhaled through her nose, tilting her head slightly. "Are we really going to do this here?" I smiled. A real smile. "Oh, we're absolutely doing this here." And then, before she could stop me, I turned to the guests standing nearby. "Hey, guys," I said casually. "Can you give us a minute?" They hesitated, glancing between us, sensing the shift in the air. Then Lisa let out a small laugh, too bright, too forced. "He's just had a little too much to drink," she said smoothly, placing a hand on my arm like she could just steer me away from this conversation. "Nothing to worry about." I stepped back, her hand slipping from my sleeve. Her smile flickered. And that was when she knew. This wasn't going to go away. I glanced at Sophie, our daughter, who was standing near the dance floor, laughing with her new husband. She was still oblivious. She still thought everything was perfect. And she deserved to think that. Because no matter what, none of this was her fault. I wasn't going to destroy her night. But Lisa? Lisa didn't get to keep pretending. "Come with me," I said, my voice so calm it barely sounded like my own. Lisa hesitated. Then she let out a quiet breath and nodded. "Fine," she murmured. I turned and walked toward the hallway, not waiting to see if she followed. I knew she would. Because Lisa had spent years controlling situations, controlling me. And right now? She was desperate to regain that control. We stepped into the hallway, the door clicking shut behind us. The noise of the reception faded, leaving only the silence between us. I turned to face her. Lisa crossed her arms, exhaling sharply. "Okay, let's hear it. What's this big dramatic?" "I know." Lisa froze. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. And there it was. The first real reaction I'd seen from her all night. I took a slow step forward, my voice dropping lower. "I know, Lisa. About Sophie. About Tom. About all of it." Lisa's throat moved as she swallowed, her hands tightening around her arms. "Who told you?" I laughed, shaking my head. "That's your first question?" She didn't answer. Because she wasn't shocked that I knew. She was just annoyed that someone had told me. "How long were you going to keep this up?" I asked. "Another 20 years? Until I was dead? Or were you just going to let me die without ever knowing?" Lisa pressed her lips together. "You're overreacting." And that was it. That was the moment she lost. I exhaled a slow, measured breath. Then I smiled. "Okay," I said lightly. "Let's play a game." Lisa narrowed her eyes. "What?" I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and tapped the screen a few times. Then I turned it to face her. A photo filled the screen. Of Tom. Walking out of this very building. Lisa's breath hitched. I watched her face closely, waiting for it, and there it was. That split-second flash of panic. She hadn't known I'd confronted him. She hadn't known I made him leave. You're not in control anymore, Lisa, I said quietly. So let's try this again. How long? She opened her mouth, closed it. Then, finally, she let out a slow breath. And she said the first real thing I had heard from her all night. Since the beginning. The words landed like a blow. I nodded slowly, locking eyes with her. That's all I needed to hear. Then I turned and walked away. Because Lisa, she wasn't my problem anymore. I walked away, my body moving on autopilot, my mind still catching up to what had just happened. Lisa's words echoed in my head, over and over, like a song stuck on repeat. Since the beginning, I had spent 2 decades waking up next to a woman who had been lying to me since the very first moment. She had carried my last name, shared my bed, worn the ring I had put on her finger, all while knowing the truth and choosing to say nothing. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was past angry. Anger was hot, explosive. It made your vision blur and your hands shake. What I felt, it was cold, calculated. It wasn't fire, it was ice settling in my veins, slowing my heartbeat, making my movements deliberate, controlled. Lisa had spent years making a fool out of me. She had played the perfect wife, the perfect mother, while keeping the ugliest secret buried underneath. And now? Now I was done playing along. I reached the ballroom doors but didn't push through them just yet. Instead, I stood there for a second collecting my thoughts. Because I had a choice to make. I could walk back into that room, pull Sophie aside, and drop the truth in her lap. I could tell my daughter, no matter what biology said, that the woman she idolized, the woman she looked up to, was a fraud. That the man she had called her father wasn't really her father. I could burn it all down. But I wouldn't. Not tonight. Because Sophie deserved better than that. She didn't deserve to have her entire world turned upside down at her own wedding. She didn't deserve to have the happiest night of her life tainted by a truth she never asked for. So I took a slow breath, exhaled through my nose, and stepped forward, pushing through the doors. The warmth and noise of the reception hit me again. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses grating against my skin. I scanned the room, searching for Lisa, but she wasn't there. Coward. She was probably still in the hallway, gathering herself, trying to figure out what to do now that she'd lost control. Good. Let her sit in it. Instead, I focused on Sophie. She was still on the dance floor, spinning in the arms of her husband, her smile wide, her eyes shining. And for a moment, just a moment, I let myself pretend. Pretend that tonight was just a normal night. Pretend that my world hadn't just shattered into 1,000 pieces. I felt a presence beside me. Dan. He stood there with his hands in his pockets, his gaze flicking between me and Sophie. You're not gonna tell her, are you? I didn't look at him. Not tonight. Dan exhaled, nodding slightly. Probably the right call. I turned my head slowly, locking eyes with him. You don't get to weigh in on what's right, Dan. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. I know. I studied him for a moment, then looked back at Sophie. I'm leaving, I said. Dan blinked. Yeah? Yeah. He hesitated. What about Lisa? I almost laughed. What about her? Dan opened his mouth, then thought better of it and closed it again. Good choice. I took a step forward, then stopped. One last thing. I turned to face him fully. Tell your sister something for me. Dan nodded, waiting. Tell her she's going to regret every single second of what she did. Dan swallowed again but didn't say anything. And with that I walked out. Because Lisa might have spent 20 years keeping secrets. But now? Now it was my turn. I drove home in silence. No music, no radio, just the sound of my tires on the pavement and the distant hum of the city outside. My hands were steady on the wheel, my breath even, my heartbeat slow. I wasn't broken. Not anymore. The moment I had walked out of that wedding, something had clicked inside me. A shift. Like I had finally stepped off the stage of the life Lisa had scripted for me and into something real. Something that belonged to me. I wasn't going to be the fool anymore. Lisa had spent 20 years lying to me and she had gotten away with it because she thought she was smarter than me. But she had made one mistake. She had underestimated what happened when a man like me finally saw the truth. And now? Now it was my turn to lie to her. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I knew exactly what I was going to do. Lisa's car was already there, parked in its usual spot. She had left the wedding before me, probably thinking she could get ahead of this, regain control before I had time to process. She had no idea I had already won. I stepped inside, the house dark except for the glow of the kitchen light. Lisa was sitting at the counter, a half-finished glass of wine in front of her. She was still in her dress, but she had kicked off her shoes, her posture stiff, her fingers tapping against the glass. She looked up when she heard me come in, her expression unreadable. "You left early," she said. I closed the door behind me, setting my keys down on the table. "So did you?" Lisa studied me, trying to gauge my mood, trying to figure out how much damage control she needed to do. "Are we going to talk about this?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. I met her gaze and smiled. A real smile. "No," I said. "We're not." That caught her off guard. Her eyebrows pulled together slightly. "What?" I stepped closer, leaning against the counter across from her. "I'm done talking, Lisa." She narrowed her eyes, clearly not liking the shift in tone. "You don't just get to decide that." I let out a small chuckle. "That's where you're wrong." Lisa straightened, tension creeping into her shoulders. She didn't like this. Didn't like the fact that I wasn't reacting the way she had expected me to. She had probably prepared for rage, yelling, maybe even tears. What she wasn't prepared for? Indifference. "You cheated on me," I said, my voice calm, factual. "You lied to me. You let me raise another man's child and you never planned to tell me. That's who you are, Lisa. That's what you did. And now?" I shrugged. "Now, I don't care." Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. "You see," I continued, "for 20 years you had all the power. You controlled the narrative. You decided what I did and didn't get to know. You made sure I played the role you wanted me to play. But that's over now." Lisa exhaled through her nose, folding her arms. "And what? You think you have the power now?" I smiled again. "I know I do." Lisa scoffed. "Oh, please. If you were going to leave me, you would have already started packing." I chuckled. "Leave you?" "Oh, Lisa." I leaned in slightly, dropping my voice to something almost amused. "Who said I was leaving?" That got her. For the first time all night, I saw real fear flicker through her eyes, because suddenly the game had changed. Lisa had expected a clean break. Either I'd leave her or she'd leave me. That's how these things went, right? That's how normal people handled betrayal. But I wasn't giving her that. I was staying. And now, she was the one who had to wonder what happened next. "You want to know what's funny?" I said, watching her carefully. "I spent so many years thinking we were happy, thinking we were a team, that I had a wife who actually loved me. And the whole time, you were lying through your teeth." Lisa swallowed but didn't speak. I leaned back, stretching out my arms slightly. "So now? Now, I think it's only fair that I get to lie to you." Lisa's breath hitched. "What the hell does that mean?" "It means," I said slowly, "that from now on, you don't get to know what I'm thinking. You don't get to know what I'm planning. You don't get to know what I'm doing with my money, my time, or my life. Because just like you spent 20 years keeping secrets from me, now?" I smiled. "Now I'm keeping secrets from you." Lisa stared at me, her fingers tightening around her wine glass. "You're bluffing," she said, but there was doubt in her voice now. I didn't answer. I just turned and walked toward the stairs. "Where are you going?" she called after me. I paused at the base of the staircase, looking over my shoulder. "To bed." I shrugged. "Long day." And then I walked up the stairs, leaving her sitting there, staring after me, wondering. For the first time in our marriage, Lisa was the one in the dark. And she was about to learn just how terrifying that could be.